Welcome. What does it mean to draw the internal anatomy of something as it relates to the urinary system? We are going to be taking a look at the internal anatomy of a kidney. So if we took a kidney and we made a frontal section through it, that means we end up with a front and a back or an anterior and posterior part of the kidney. We're going to look at the inside and see what we find. There are very specific regions inside the kidney that have different jobs. So what is on our structures list today? The outer part of the kidney is called the renal cortex, and deeper within the kidney, within the medulla, are structures called renal pyramids. The tip of each pyramid is called a renal papilla. And what we're going to see is that different parts of the nephron, the microscopic structures that do the job of making urine inside the kidneys, different parts of those are in the cortex or in the pyramids, and that's going to matter for the functions that those nephrons are performing. The urine that is produced by the nephrons will enter the nephron, or excuse me, exit the nephron at the renal papilla, and that will put the newly formed urine into a tube called a minor calyx. Minor calyces will come together to form major calyces. So these are just tubes of different sizes. And then eventually all of those tubes come together in the middle to form kind of a funny shaped structure called the renal pelvis. The renal pelvis is then continuous with the ureter. And so these things up at the top of this list, these are spaces or kind of parts of the kidney. Everything down here is transporting urine that was made by microscopic structures called nephrons that are in the cortex and the pyramids. Before we begin drawing, I want you to imagine that you are looking at the medial side of a kidney. So this is the side of the kidney where things like the ureter are coming out, the blood vessels are going in and out. Now I want you to imagine that you open up the kidney like a book. So we have kind of the front and back now on the left and right sides. That's what we're going to be drawing. This is a frontal section of a kidney. I'm only going to draw one side so that our labels don't get messy, but obviously this would be bilaterally symmetrical. Yeah. All right, so here's the outside of our kidney, and I'm going to highlight the region that we call the renal cortex here in light green. So this is just the outer portion of the kidney. So this is our renal cortex, which means all the other space in here is going to be renal medulla. We don't talk a ton about the medulla because there are interesting names for different things that are inside of the medulla. In blue here, I'm going to draw some renal pyramids. So obviously in 3D, these would be shaped like pyramids, but in 2 dimensions, they just kind of look like little wedges. So each of these is a renal pyramid. There are little bits of this cortex that come down into the medulla. We call these renal columns. Not an essential concept, in my opinion. All right, at the tip of each pyramid, so here, and here, we call this a renal papilla. I'm only going to label one of them. And so, like I mentioned earlier, the work of making pee is happening in nephrons, these microscopic structures that some parts of them are out here in the cortex, some parts of them are here in the medulla, or excuse me, in the pyramid, and that freshly formed urine exits the pyramid at the tip of the pyramid, at the papilla. Now, it doesn't just end up hanging out in the middle of the kidney, it winds up in a little tube called a minor calyx. So each pyramid has a little tube coming out of it. And when we have this tube that's just draining one pyramid, we call this a minor calyx. So I think I like this one right here. So this is the pyramid. This little bit of tube right here would be a minor calyx. As multiple minor calyces come together, and you can see some of them already started merging here and here. Anytime two or more minor calyces get together, then we make a major calyx. So this here would be an example of a major calyx. And you can already see that eventually all the major calyces come together and just make kind of this really funny shaped area right here. This funny shaped spot that is carrying urine is called the renal pelvis. And eventually that renal pelvis is going to not be so funny shaped anymore. It's going to make a tube. And this tube should look familiar. We had been drawing in purple, but now it's orange. This is our ureter. So urine was produced by nephrons that are hanging out, parts of them in the cortex, parts of them in each pyramid. That urine exits a pyramid at the renal papilla, which is just the word for the tip of the pyramid, finds itself in a minor calyx, then a major calyx, then the renal pelvis, and then in the ureter headed to the urinary bladder. That is the internal anatomy of a kidney.